They sat in a companionable silence then, the storm a soft percussion beyond the walls. The warmth from the tea seeped through Aaliyah's palms, and she realized how tired she was, not from travel, but from weeks of tension. Mrs. Kang's voice broke the quiet again. He works too much. I've told him a company can survive a scandal, but not an empty heart. Aaliyah looked up. He told me once that you wanted him to marry someone from the right family. I wanted him to be safe, Mrs. Kang said. But safety is a poor substitute for joy. Aaliyah nodded slowly. I don't know where this leads. Maybe it ends badly. But I'm willing to see where it goes. The matriarch studied her for a long moment, then rose, crossing the room with measured grace. She stopped beside Aaliyah's chair and touched her shoulder lightly, a gesture at once formal and intimate. Then see, she said. And know that tonight you have a place to rest. The door opened, and a maid appeared to lead Aaliyah to a guest room overlooking a garden of wet stone and lantern light. As she lay awake later, listening to the rain, she thought of Min-jun somewhere in the same city, carrying 1,000 storms on his shoulders. And for the first time since she'd boarded the plane, she believed she might actually reach him. The storm had grown louder by nightfall, sweeping across Seoul like a living thing. Wind rattled the eaves of the hammock as lanterns flickered in the courtyard. Inside the guest room, Aaliyah stood by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights below the hills. She didn't know how long she'd been standing there, long enough for her reflection to fade into the glass, long enough for her pulse to slow into a dull ache. Every sound, each gust, each footstep in the corridor, made her heart leap. Then there was one knock. Firm. Familiar. She turned, breath catching. The door slid open. He stood there, damp from the rain, collar loosened, eyes rimmed red from exhaustion. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then he exhaled a shaky breath, as though he'd been holding it since the moment she left Florida. Aaliyah. Her name came out half a whisper, half a prayer. She crossed the room before she could think, every nerve alive, and when he reached for her, the restraint that had defined them both shattered. He pulled her against him, rain cold on his skin, warmth rushing between them like current. His hands trembled slightly as they framed her face, as though he couldn't believe she was real. I thought, his voice broke. I thought you'd hate me for this. For what it's cost you. She shook her head, tears slipping free. I hated the silence more. He laughed softly, bitterly. Silence was the only thing I could control. She touched his cheek. You don't have to control this. For a moment, they just breathed, forehead to forehead, the thunder a distant heartbeat. Then the words poured out, the apology, the fear, the confession. He told her about the board, about the threats, about how Ethan's people were already circling. She told him about the flight, about his grandmother's unexpected kindness, about the ache that hadn't stopped until this moment. When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate. The kind of kiss that erases miles and headlines, that carries every unsent message and every sleepless night. His hands slid to her back, hers to his hair, and when they finally broke apart, both were shaking. I don't know how we survived this, she whispered. He rested his forehead against hers. Then we learned together, one day at a time. A knock came at the door again, soft, deliberate. Mrs. Kang's voice floated through. Min-jun, you have 10 minutes before the press learns she's here. Decide how you wish them to see you. He closed his eyes, always at the edge of a storm. Aaliyah smiled through her tears. Then maybe we dance in the rain. He looked at her, really looked, and something in him steadied. Stay with me, he said simply. I already am. Outside, thunder rolled, but it sounded almost like applause. The rain had not stopped by morning. It fell steady and silver through the courtyard, turning every stone path into a ribbon of reflected light. The city beyond the hills was awake now, car horns, news reports, and the low static of an approaching storm. Inside, the house was still. Aaliyah sat on the edge of the low bed, barefoot, wearing one of the cotton shirts the staff had left for her. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar. Her fingers traced the rim of a teacup that had long gone cold. In the next room, she could hear Min-jun speaking with his grandmother and his assistant in quick Korean, his voice low but sharp with fatigue. Even without knowing the words, she could feel their weight. She pulled the window open a little. Humid air rolled in. The gardens below were veiled in mist. Somewhere in that haze, flashes from camera lenses blinked like distant lightning, reporters already gathering at the gates. When he stepped into the room, the air changed. He looked different now, composed again, hair slicked back, dark suit pressed. Only the faint shadow beneath his eyes betrayed the sleepless night. "They're waiting outside," she asked quietly. He nodded. "The press, the investors, Ethan's people. Everyone. And us." He met her gaze. "We decide how to be seen." She rose, crossing to him. "You don't have to protect me from this, Min-jun." His smile was small, almost sad. "It's all I've been taught to do." "Then let me unteach you." Her hand found his. For a moment, the two of them just stood there, palms pressed together, the storm murmuring around them like an old song. He took a slow breath. "When I walk out there, I'll tell them I'm not stepping down, that the company will stand, that you're not my scandal, you're my choice." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to say my name." He shook his head. "I want to." They stayed like that until a knock came. "Mrs. Kang." "They're ready," she said through the door. "And the cameras have begun to roll." Min-jun turned back to Aaliyah. "Are you ready?" She squeezed his hand once. "Not even a little," she said, voice trembling but steady enough to make him smile. "But let's go anyway." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Together. Always." They walked down the long corridor side by side, the sound of rain following them like applause against the roof. The gate of the Kang estate loomed through the mist, its iron lattice streaked with rain. Beyond it, a storm of humanity waited. Reporters, camera crews, flashing lights. Their voices merged into one long, hungry hum, rising and falling with every movement from within the walls. Aaliyah's hand trembled slightly in Min-jun's as they stepped onto the stone path. The umbrella above them barely shielded them from the downpour. Security guards tried to hold the line, but microphones thrust forward like spears. "Mr. Kang, is the woman beside you the same person from the photos?" "Miss, how long have you known the CEO? Is this relationship a distraction from K-Global's upcoming merger? Will you resign, sir?" Each question hit like hail. Min-jun's jaw was locked, his free hand tightening around the umbrella handle. A flash exploded inches from Aaliyah's face, and she flinched instinctively. He stopped, turned slightly, and with a quiet authority that cut through the noise, said, "Enough." The crowd stilled, not silent, but hesitating. Something about the way he stood, soaked through, calm as stone, demanded attention. "This," he said, voice rising just enough to reach the cameras, "is the person you've all been talking about. You can take your photos, you can print your stories, but I'll answer one question and then you'll leave." He looked at the nearest reporter. "Ask it." The man hesitated, caught between fear and ambition. "Are you admitting that you've risked your company for this relationship?" Min-jun's gaze flicked toward Aaliyah, who met his eyes with a small, steady nod. "Yes," he said finally, "because sometimes the risk is what proves the worth." The words rippled through the crowd. A few reporters gasped, others scrambled to record every syllable. Before the next question could fly, another voice cut in. Calm, smooth, venomous. "Touching," Ethan said, stepping forward from beneath a black umbrella, his designer coat dry despite the rain. Cameras pivoted instantly toward him. "Ethan," Min-jun said evenly. "Min-jun," Ethan replied, smile sharp as glass. "You always did know how to turn scandal into spectacle." "This isn't spectacle," Min-jun said. "It's honesty." Ethan's gaze slid to Aaliyah. "And what does honesty buy you now? Stocks dropping? Investors running? Or is love the new business model?" A murmur went through the crowd. Aaliyah stiffened, but Min-jun's hand tightened in hers. "It buys me peace," he said simply. Ethan's smirk faltered for the first time. Rain spattered his umbrella, loud in the brief silence. Then, with a curt nod to the cameras, he turned away. Reporters shouted after him, but he ignored them. Min-jun looked back at the press, the light glinting off his soaked suit. "That's all," he said. "Now, let us go home." Security moved in, clearing a path. Aaliyah followed beside him, head high, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might echo through the cameras. When the gates closed behind them, the noise faded to a dull roar outside the walls. Only then did she let herself breathe. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He looked at her, eyes bright with exhaustion and pride. "Yes," he said softly, "I did." The storm quieted after midnight, leaving the world damp and exhausted. Rainwater still slid down the windows of the Kang estate, dripping from the eaves like the slow ticking of a clock. Inside, the house felt too large, too silent. The air carried the scent of wet pine and faint incense. Aaliyah sat curled on the sofa in the small sitting room adjoining her guest quarters. She had changed into dry clothes, her hair tied loosely at her nape. A single lamp burned beside her, casting long shadows that trembled when the wind sighed through the trees outside. On the table lay a small stack of newspapers and a tablet screen lit with headlines. K Global CEO defies critics in emotional stand. Storm over Seoul, love and scandal at the top. Markets react to Kang's defiance. She shut the tablet and pressed her palms over her eyes. The ache behind them wasn't from the light. It was from the noise, the constant scrutiny, the thought of millions of strangers turning their names into stories. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor. She didn't have to look up to know it was him. He set his phone face down on the table, jacket draped over the arm of a chair. The exhaustion on his face made him look older than 30. "Any good news?" she asked quietly. He gave a low, humorless laugh. "The board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow. Investors are threatening to freeze funds. Ethan's people are flooding the media with spin. And your grandmother? She told them if they want to fire me, they'll have to explain to the shareholders why the company was built by a coward." Aaliyah smiled faintly. "Remind me to thank her again." He moved closer, sitting opposite her. The space between them buzzed with the same fragile tension that had followed them since Florida, something between fear and gravity. "You shouldn't have to live through this," he said. "It's not your fight." Her eyes met his. "It became mine the moment you stood beside me." He stared at the floor. "I don't know how to protect you from all of it." "Maybe you don't need to," she whispered. "Maybe you just have to let me stay." He looked up, eyes bright in the lamplight. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with all the things they hadn't said since the day they met. The gratitude, the terror, the slow-burning love that had grown between press releases and sleepless nights. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When my father died, I promised I'd never let emotion ruin what he built. That's why I buried everything else, friends, love, anything that felt like weakness. But tonight, when I saw you out there, I realized the only thing that's ever made me strong was you." Tears blurred her vision. She reached across the small space and took his hand. "Then don't bury this, Min-jun. Not again." He turned her hand over and pressed his lips to her palm. "If I lose everything else, I'll keep this." They sat that way until the lamp flickered out and the house fell into complete silence. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing, the faint thunder retreating somewhere over the mountains. In the darkness, Aaliyah whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, promise me you won't face it alone." He squeezed her hand once, a quiet vow against the quiet. Never again. Dawn bled pale across Seoul, turning the Han River to a ribbon of mercury. From her office at the top of the Kang family tower, Mrs. Kang watched the city stir to life below. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy with unfinished thunder. Her desk was a battlefield of open folders, news printouts, and a tablet streaming the morning financial reports. K Global's stock graph flickered in cruel honesty, a steep dip, a hesitant plateau. She adjusted her glasses and moved. Markets could recover. Reputations required strategy. A knock. Her aide entered. an older man who had served her husband and then her grandson. He carried a silver tray with tea and an envelope marked confidential. She took the envelope first. Inside were copies of an email chain. Ethan's name threaded through it, his words measured but unmistakable. He'd been meeting with 2 board members privately, promising stability and discretion if they supported his bid for interim control. Mrs. Kang read the lines twice, her expression unchanged. Then she set the papers down and poured her tea. "Has Min-jun seen this?" she asked. "Not yet, madam. He's still at the estate." "Good. Let him rest a few more hours." The aide hesitated. "And our response?" She smiled faintly, a curve both kind and dangerous. "We remind the board that a scandal fades, but disloyalty is forever." She reached for her phone, dialed a number from memory, and waited until a sleepy voice answered. "Minister Cho," she said pleasantly. "Forgive the early call. I just thought you'd want to know that your technology initiative may lose its largest investor if certain parties succeed in undermining my grandson's position." A pause on the other end. Then, "I see. Of course, I'm certain you'll act in the nation's best interest," she said, tone smooth as silk. Stability is, after all, the mark of a reliable partnership. When she hung up, her aide asked, "You're bringing the government into this?" "I'm reminding them that K-Global's fall would ripple far beyond one family." She took a sip of tea, eyes on the city. "Ethan thinks power is taken by force. He's wrong. It's taken by patience." Across town, morning light crept into the Kang estate. Aaliyah stirred awake to find the space beside her empty, the imprint of Min-jun's hand still warm on the cushion. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and through the window saw him standing in the courtyard, phone to his ear, raincoat draped over one arm. His posture was tense, but something about him looked steadier than the night before, like a man who finally knew which war was his to fight. Back in her office, Mrs. Kang set down her teacup, satisfied. The first countermove had begun. By noon, the city had turned to glass and heat. Every news channel in Seoul hummed with speculation. K-Global at a crossroads. CFO Ethan CEO rumored to take helm. Investors demand leadership stability. Mrs. Kang watched it unfold from the marble silence of her private study. The walls, lined with portraits of ancestors, seemed to listen. Her assistant, Mr. Han, returned with an update. "Madam, 2 of the neutral board members have switched sides overnight. Ethan is promising them access to the Japanese partnership deal." She nodded slowly. "That explains his confidence." Han hesitated. "Shall I prepare statements?" "No. Statements are noise. We move quietly." She stood, smoothing the silk of her hanbok jacket, and walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with traffic, tiny symbols of lives untouched by boardroom wars. "Schedule a luncheon for tomorrow. Invite the investors' wives. No agenda. Just tea and conversation." Han blinked. "Madam." She smiled faintly. "Men sign contracts. Women hold memories. By the time they return home, Ethan's promises will sound like betrayal." Meanwhile, at the estate, Aaliyah sat at the edge of the courtyard pond, notebook open, pen hovering over blank paper. The morning's peace couldn't drown out the storm inside her. Her phone buzzed, a message from a journalist she had met in Florida. "Aaliyah, I know you're in Seoul. People are twisting what happened. You can fix the narrative, tell your side. I'll protect your identity until you're ready to go public." She stared at the message. Her hands trembled slightly. She could imagine what that meant. Headlines, talk shows, the sudden glare of attention. Min-jun had stepped into the fire by choice. She hadn't. A few feet away, Mrs. Kang's maid approached quietly. "Miss Aaliyah, the madam would like to see you in her study." Aaliyah followed, her heart tightening. The corridors of the Kang home were long, lined with history and expectation. When she entered, Mrs. Kang looked up from her tea. "You've received messages from journalists," she said calmly. Aaliyah froze. "How did you?" "My staff monitors communications that might compromise our safety." "Don't worry, your privacy is intact." A beat of silence stretched between them. Do you want me to tell the world my side? Aaliyah asked finally. Mrs. Kang's gaze softened. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can carry the weight of being seen. I just don't want to make things worse for him. Sometimes silence is worse, the old woman said. It lets the wrong people write the story. Aaliyah swallowed. And if I speak? Mrs. Kang leaned forward. Then do it not as his defender, but as his equal. That night, as the sun dipped behind the city's edge, two women, one at the twilight of her power, the other at the dawn of her courage, began shaping the same war from different ends of the board. The studio was nothing more than a rented conference room on the 13th floor of a nondescript Seoul office building, deliberately chosen for anonymity. The blinds were drawn, the lights softened, and the cameras silent except for their steady red recording dots. Aaliyah sat opposite the interviewer, a woman in her 40s with a calm, measured voice. No makeup artists, no crowd of producers, just two women, 2 cups of green tea, and the quiet hum of truth waiting to be spoken. Before they began, the interviewer leaned forward. You understand the risks? Aaliyah nodded. Yes. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm just here to tell the truth. Then let's begin. The recording light blinked. The interviewer spoke first, her tone soft. You've been called many things in the press, the outsider, the distraction, the cause of a scandal. Who are you really, Ms. Johnson? Aaliyah took a slow breath. I'm just someone who met a man at the wrong moment, or maybe the right one. I didn't expect him to be who he was, and he didn't expect me to change anything in his life. But somehow we collided. She smiled faintly, remembering the laptop falling, the look of apology in Min-jun's eyes. When people ask if this was calculated, I wish they could see how unplanned it all was. There was no strategy, no gain. Just two people trying to make sense of each other across worlds that don't always meet. The interviewer's pen moved quietly over paper. And what do you say to those who believe you're after his wealth or position? Aaliyah's gaze didn't waver. Wealth can't buy peace. It can't buy respect. If I wanted either of those things, I would have accepted his offer to replace my laptop that first day. But I didn't. Because I don't need his money. I just needed him to see me. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier with sincerity. The interviewer's next question was softer. Do you love him? Aaliyah hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of honesty. Yes, she said finally. But love isn't always a fairy tale. Sometimes it's standing beside someone while the world decides if you deserve to be there. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. She continued, voice low. If people see this, I want them to know he's not the scandal they're painting him to be. He's a man trying to protect what he built and the people he cares about. If that makes him flawed, then so am I. The interviewer lowered her pen. One last question. What do you hope comes from this? Aaliyah looked straight into the lens. That people stop measuring worth by headlines. That they understand love doesn't care about boardrooms or bloodlines. It just asks for courage. The light on the camera blinked off. The quiet returned. The interviewer reached across the table, touching her hand. That was brave. Aaliyah smiled faintly. It had to be. Outside, as she stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, her phone buzzed. A message from Min-jun. They'll air it tonight. I'm proud of you. She stared at the words, heart swelling and trembling all at once. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like she was standing exactly where she was meant to be. Ethan Seo had always prided himself on control. Control over his tone in board meetings. Control over the flicker of his expression when others spoke. Control over the timing of every word he released into the world. But this morning, control slipped through his fingers like sand. The television in his penthouse office glared with color and motion, Aaliyah's interview airing across half the nation. Her voice was calm, measured, unshakable. Every word cut cleanly through the noise that he had spent weeks orchestrating. Love doesn't care about boardrooms or bloodlines. It just asks for courage. Courage. That word struck like a blade. By the time the segment ended, Ethan's coffee had gone cold and his hand had tightened around the edge of the desk. His phone lit up with messages, reporters demanding statements, investors requesting clarification. But the one that mattered most came from one of his supposed allies on the board. The tide is shifting. We may need to reconsider our vote.
Thank you for watching. Episode 4 ends here. If you enjoyed the story, leave us a comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and click on your notification bell to get notified whenever a new story is made.